Welcome to FP&A Fast Track, your source for FP&A resources to put your career on the fast track. Welcome everybody. I have a great guest with me today, Mr. Asif Masani, and I want to give a brief introduction and then I want to throw it over to Asif because he has such a deep and varied background that I always like our guests to kind of give their own expansion on what they think are kind of the most important things that they would like you to understand about their background before we dive into the conversation. So for starters, Asif Masani is an author of Amazon bestseller All About FP&A. He's the managing partner and lead trainer at FP&A Professionals, which we'll talk about, of course. His mission is to help 1 million finance professionals master FP&A skills, an ambitious goal, but one that you're off to a roaring start on because I see the content that you're putting out all the time. He's an FP&A professional with 13 plus years of finance and FP&A experience. He's worked across the banking, pharma, and ed tech industries with organizations like EY, Citibank, Pfizer, and Coursera. Presently, he's the managing partner at ADAK Education LLC. He's also a chartered accountant by qualification with a flair for driving strategy, decision-making, and value creation for organizations. He's one of the leading thought leaders in the field of FP&A, strategy, and leadership. He's a regular contributor to FP&A Trends and FP&A Professionals. And as we said, his goal is to help 1 million students. And as far as being one of the leading thought leaders, right now you've got over 133,000 followers just on LinkedIn alone, and not even talking about any of the other social platforms. So I think by any measure, you're one of the top influencers in the finance community. So let me throw it back to you and tell us a little bit more about where you might want to fill in the blanks and what you're focused on the most right now.
Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to this episode. Very glad to be here speaking to you today. On the introduction, thank you so much again for such a wonderful introduction. What I can do is I can probably add more context to it. So what I like to do is I like to divide it into two parts. The first part is the more traditional roles that I've done, which a lot of people do when they start out working in finance and accounting. So I started my career in accounting and audit with EY, where I also did my internship. So I was doing a lot of audit related work, mostly into statutory audit. So this was auditing, uh, just like you have Fortune 500 companies there in India, top 200 companies or BSE 200 companies. So it was auditing top companies in India working with EY. And then I realized I don't probably want to make my career in audit. And that's how when I decided to move out from there. At that time, I really wanted to get into a valuation or an investment banking type of a role because that was something that was very, I mean, if you can call it, that was where people would make a lot of money, and that's where people wanted to be at that point in time, which was about 10 years ago. I could not get into one. I tried, I think, giving about 5 to 7 interviews. What I got into was an FP&A role at Citi, which I did not even know about. So I did not know about FP&A when I started working in that role. Even during the interviews, I was clueless, and I don't know how I got that role. But that's how I started into FP&A. Working there was probably a very good experience. Starting from an analyst, moving to right to the FP&A manager, which was 5 years working with different business units. So I had about 3 different roles while I was working at Citi. And after doing that for 5 years, I realized I need to do something else. It was kind of a feeling where you get a feeling, okay, I've done this for 5 years. Let me try something right now, which is probably different. Because this might be the right time to try, and maybe once you go more senior, it may not be the best. I mean, you may not be able to do more experiments after this point. So because I have done my chartered accountancy in India, and CAs in India usually are into were into traditional and are into traditional roles largely, which is audit, taxation, and compliance related roles. So at that time, there was a new tax legislation implemented in India, which was goods and service tax, which was the indirect tax legislation, and I was following that very closely that time, which was 2018 and 2019, and I got really interested in it. Uh, so I quit my job at City and took a break for about 6 months to get more into that. And in fact, I even started a tax firm, which was a small practice. But eventually, I realized after doing that for about 8 to 10 months that this is not something which I want to do it again for the long term. It looked very interesting when I started, or before when I started doing it. But once I got into it, I realized it is a lot more than what I thought in terms of the commitment and in terms of also the interest for being into their long term. So again, when I wanted to switch back to FP&A, uh, at that time, this was about February 2020. So this was a time when COVID was just about to hit. What I did at that point, once I decided I want to come back to FP&A, I started again giving interviews for different FP&A roles. But by the time that happened, it was already COVID time, and a lot of companies had already started freezing hiring. And even I think I had given a couple of interviews which were at a very advanced stage, but they froze hiring because of the COVID. What I was lucky to get at that point was a contract with Pfizer, which was a short term contract. They were not hiring full time employees, but they were open to have people on contract, which was a 6 month arrangement. So I took that just to be back into the FP&A, which I had a break of about 8 to 10 months. I worked there for about I think 6 to 8 months there, and at that time the edtech industry was doing very well because it was COVID and people were at home and people were learning from home because they had the time, and then they could I mean they got used to the online culture of Zoom and everything. So the edtech companies were doing very well. Uh, so I decided, okay, let me focus on this industry, which I also like in terms of the business model. So this is something which excited me. Uh, and then I moved into a FP&A role with one of the other edtech companies in India, and that led to the role at Coursera, which was 2021. So last about 2.5 years, I've been leading the India APAC FP&A function for Coursera, and uh, this was the first half, which was a more traditional part of it, and the second part is where I believe where I mean that's the reason probably we are here today and we are talking today is more on the what I call it as non-linear bet that resulted out into something. I mean, something very unique and very different, which I had never imagined. So this started again in 2020. This was again during the COVID time. Uh, there was a request from somebody on LinkedIn, which was in my network and wanted me to take a webinar on FP&A. How do people approach this role? Because a lot of new accountants were uh, curious to know about FP&A. Still, it's a new term in India, especially. So I decided to do that webinar. Uh, about I think 70, 80 people attended that webinar live, but we put the webinar recording on YouTube, and it didn't do. I mean, it got like few hundred views in the first couple of months, but suddenly sometime after a month or two of it being there, it started getting hundreds and thousands of views, and people started reaching out to me on LinkedIn about, I mean, asking more questions on how do we approach this role. So that's how I started writing on LinkedIn because all those questions were coming to me, and I didn't want to again and again answer the same questions, because most of the questions were on the similar lines. So that's how I started writing on LinkedIn. Once I did that for about I think 6 to 8 months, I had enough material to write a book, which was also one of my, one of my bucket list. It was there on one of my bucket list, but I never thought what book it would be. But this was a good chance for me to collect all of the material that I have written in the last 6 to 8 months, and that's how I wrote that book. That this was November, I think 2022, which is a year and a half back. Um, that book did well. It sold about 2,000 copies until now. And after writing the book, people reached out to me again. More people reached out to me asking for, okay, you've written about this, and we understand, but can you also share more practical examples? Can you share, can you share things on how we do this in
How to
Excel?
choose.
How do we do this on a Power BI? So that's when the training and all of the other things that I do that came into. So there was another uh, gentleman I was following who was doing FP&A trainings at that time. So I decided, instead of starting something from scratch, why do not I reach out to that person, which is also my business partner right now, and to do something together. So my book and his trainings, and then we decided to build upon it. It was a 2.5 hour training, which was very popular on Udemy at that time. And we decided to make that training from a 2 hour curriculum to a 20 hour curriculum, which is right now, and hundreds of people have taken that training. So yeah, that's how the second part, which is more exciting, and that led to me getting into this full time, which is very recently this month.
Wow. So that's quite a journey. So I'm curious, you said that it sounded like the genesis of what you're doing now on the training side started with questions. Were the questions more about how do I get into FP&A, or how do I do fill in the blank XYZ task or skill within FP&A, or was there some mix?
So it was a mix. So there were broadly three types of people who reached out to me. The first category would be who would want to get into FP&A but who are in accounting, audit roles like I was, and they were not getting interviews, or they're not able to. If they were getting interviews, they're not able to crack those interviews. So that was one type of people that reached out to me. The other type of people that reached out to me who were just starting out in FP&A, but were very clueless on how to approach that role, uh, which I could relate to, because I felt the same when I started my career in FP&A.
Yeah, I
I
kind of been there,
mentioned
done
that
that.
Yes, I mentioned that I did not know anything about FP&A, and what I realized that whatever I learned in the first 2.5 years, that can be that can be structured into a training, which can be done in a period of 2 months, and it doesn't have to take 2 years to learn all of that. Maybe they can practically implement all of those things, and that might be another thing. But in terms of knowing what to do, and knowing what is budgeting, what is forecasting, for example, or what is how do you prepare a budget, how do you prepare a forecast, those are things that you learn on the job, which takes about a year and a half. That doesn't
Hmm.
have to that way. That can be done in a very short period of
Right.
time. That was the second type of audience. And third type of audience, which were surprisingly people who were very experienced in FP&A, were like my peers who had 5 to 7 years of experience in FP&A, but they still wanted to learn more. They wanted to learn about other industries. So if they were working in banking like me, they wanted to learn about edtech. They wanted to uh, learn about
Interesting.
pharma. So a lot of those people also reached out to me. So these were broadly the three categories.
Interesting. So I see some through lines in some of the other guests that I've had on when we talk about FP&A, in the curiosity from people that want to get into it and are not quite sure how. And then those people that have experienced what it sounds like you and I both have experienced, where along the way, we've tried all these various different ways to add to our skills and improve ourselves. And now these people are realizing, hey, I can shorten some timelines here and compress the timelines in my career if I find those people that I can model, that I can learn from, that have been where I want to go, and they're ahead of me in that path, and I can shorten my time to get there. And then that other category you mentioned, like I'm guessing you and I are both in that category of those sort of lifetime learners that are just feel like we're just constantly wanting to learn, improve, and just, better ourselves in different ways, whether it's career, personal, or whatever. Um, I want to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned a few times, and I didn't mention this in your intro, but you mentioned several times that you're in India. I'm in the United States. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the United States. And I know there are some cultural differences, probably more similarities than there are differences in our cultures. But um, let's go back a little bit. When you were young, and let's say you were like when I was in high school, and I was thinking about, what do I want to be when I grow up? Right. And I'm a few years from graduating. Maybe I'm 14, 15 years old. And I'm trying to think of what I want to do in the future. And for me, accounting, which is what I got my degree in, that's what I started in out of college, that was never in my head as a child as something that I wanted to do. So I'm kind of curious, when you were, say, a teenager, what were some of the things you were thinking about that were aspirations of what you might want to do as an adult for a career?
Sure. So, how it works in India is, you once you complete your school, which is 10 grade equivalent year, then you have to decide where you want to go in life. So broadly, there were three. I mean, today there might be more options, but at that point there were three options from which we had to pick. The first one was science, uh, which a lot of people thought is the place to be, and if you got good grades, you got to take science. And I was good in study, so I was in the top 5% of the class usually. And a lot of people expected that I will take up science just because I'm good at studies, um, which I'll talk about more. But that was the first option. The second option is commerce, which is accounting and finance, and the third option is arts. So I knew that I don't want to take science because I was not interested in that. I knew I didn't want to take up arts at that point of time, which has changed over the years. So the only obvious choice which I had was like eliminating the other two, and then I dig deeper into commerce. And I did not know this when I picked it, but turned out that finance and accounting were of more interest to me than the other commerce and the arts options. So that's how
So
I.
I find it fascinating. I kind of got to where I am today similarly, not by finding a love and pursuing it, but by process of elimination, right? I know for sure I don't want these. Let me try that. And then kind of iterating on that and finally finding something. And I find it interesting how sometimes it's very easy to connect the dots between that aspiration as a kid and what you're doing now. For me, completely unrelated. All of the things that I thought about as a kid had nothing to do with account, other than I thought maybe I might want to own my own business. Um, but honestly, I didn't even really understand what that meant. It just sounded cool that rich people seem to own stuff. Like they didn't, when you would see rich people in the media, they weren't people typically that were working for other people. Um, so interesting. Uh, are there any, so I'm sure you're physically located in India, but in the world that we live in today, I mean, right now, we're recording this and you're at home in India, I'm in the United States. So you, like me, probably work with people from all over the world all of the time. And I'm curious, what are some of the more obvious cultural differences that have jumped out to you over the years where you have to make sure that you ask some questions beforehand whenever you're addressing an audience in order to sort of tailor your communication to them?
So I have worked with a lot of people from the US, from Europe, which mainly was UK and France, and then people from the Middle East, which is UAE and Saudi. So these are typically people I have interacted with. So talking about people from US, I mean, seen a lot of differences in the work side of the things. Uh, so uh, one thing I've noticed compared to India is they are less formal. So just like you call your senior by your name, there you can call say your boss by his name. In India, that's probably something that people still don't do. They call their boss as sir, and then they address them with what they feel is more respectful. So that is something I found different, which I got used to it while working with EY and the MNCs. So that is something. So people are more approachable, irrespective of their designations, so which I found good in US versus in India. It's kind of still evolving in terms of that. About the Middle East, what I've noticed is they are very much focused. They build their lives around their faith. So they would give priority to prayers, which is a wonderful thing which I've seen, and which is typically what people should do, is to prioritize their family, faith, and then the work should come after that. That is something I truly admire about people from the Middle East. In terms of FP&A, when we're talking about FP&A, uh, in terms of the differences, what I've noticed is I haven't seen people call FP&A in countries, especially in Europe. So they may call it as controllership, they may call it as a finance role.
Mhm.
But even in India, which was very, I mean, until the time I started, it was very new. So if you, I don't know how it is in the US right now, but FP&A is a very established function in the US, is what I understand,
Yeah.
which is not true in other parts of the world, especially Europe, where they still. So when I talk to people in the Europe, especially UK, France, uh, they are doing a lot of things that people do, but they may call it something else. Same thing
Right.
goes with the Middle East and also with India in some cases.
Yeah, I
You can,
think the term.
what have you seen as differences? Because you also have interacted with a lot of.
Yeah. So, firstly, on the FP&A front, I would agree with you. Here in the U.S., the terminology specifically referring to FP&A with that terminology has definitely increased in popularity over, I would say, maybe the past 10, 12 years, somewhere in that range. Um, I would give some of the credit to AFP, the Association for Financial Professionals, who came out with that FPAC credential several years ago. Um, I was right there. I've been working with them for about a decade now. And I was right there with the very first, uh, when they first put that out, and the training programs associated with that. When I was coming up, there was no terminology FP&A. The closest to it that I experienced was just planning. So when I worked at Royal Caribbean Cruises, for example, I worked in the planning department, and everything we did is basically what an FP&A department would do today. Um, so in terms of the culture, I think I've observed a lot of the same things that you mentioned. So one of the things, the feedback that I've gotten from people from India, especially, and not just in FP&A, but even in general, who live in the United States now, one of the things that they noticed right away, and I'd be curious to get your feedback, is that they noticed that Americans tend to do a lot more small talk, what we call small talk,
Mhm.
in business settings before they get down to business. And they found that they had to adjust to that, right? At first they were wondering, why is this person asking me about my family? Like,
Yeah.
how's your family? How are your kids? You ask about, some sporting event or finding some mutual interest, and they weren't used to that. Is that consistent with, does that jive with kind of your experience?
It does. So it
Okay.
depends on, so if you're dealing with somebody who's newly working, started working, say within, say, 3 years of experience, or maybe within first 5 years. So might be true for them, but eventually you get used to it because you
Yeah.
work with different people, and then
Yeah. You adapt.
yes.
Yeah. Part of the reason I asked you this question is that because we do so much work with people from so many different cultures, I'm always a big fan of, I talk a lot about the platinum rule, right? Not the golden rule of do unto others as you would like done unto you, but do unto others as they would like done unto them. So when it comes to communication, try to get a feel for how they like communication and adapt to them as much as possible. And obviously, there's a balance, right? We don't want to lose ourselves in always trying to be something different, but we want to be respectful of their perspective and their context. So some of the things, and the context for me for this question is, how do we use what we learn and observe about other people's culture and how they approach things when we come to a meeting, for example, right? Or we're doing a presentation. So I think some of the other things I have observed culturally is some of the things where people are more direct or less direct. So for example, when you have a disagreement, there are some countries and some cultures where it's very normal and typical that if someone disagrees, they'll just immediately say, I don't disagree with that, and here's why, this is my perspective. In some other cultures, they will tend to just kind of be more reserved, and they'll wait to either not address it at all, or they might wait until they're not in a group of people. Maybe they'll do it one-on-one, and they're much more, I guess, tactical and careful about how they approach it. Whereas like I'm from a Latin culture, right? My mother is from Panama. My father's Mexican, right? In that culture, that we're very, very expressive. People joke all the time that we talk with our hands, right? Like if you tied my hands, I couldn't talk, right? And so I think in those cultures, we are very much that confrontational, where if we disagree, you know about it right away, and there's no misunderstandings about disagreements. And I think that the art of it is in understanding that dance between the give and take of understanding where the other person's coming from, kind of giving a little bit to how they like to communicate, but still maintaining your own personal integrity and your identity in that communication along the way. So
I can relate. So if you look at from my experience working in India, so although India is one country, but there are about 28, I don't know exact number, but it's about 28 different states, and each state is different culturally. Each state has a different language, and there are states where you are absolutely upfront, and you don't beat around the bush. But there are also places where people are very polite, and even if they don't want, if they want to confront you, they will not say it upfront. They'll probably
right.
sugarcoat it and then phrase it in,
Yeah,
in much better way.
there's actually something that I learned early on when I was sort of learning about cross-cultural communication. And there was a quote that said that there are more differences within groups than between groups typically. And you just hit on a great example, right? All these different states and languages and cultures. Similar here in the United States, we all speak English, but you would be surprised at the accents in different parts of the country. My fiance, I could barely understand her when I met her. She grew up in North Carolina. She has a very heavy Southern accent. And I grew up in South Florida, and I don't know what my accent sounds like, but it's very different than hers, both from the United States, just a few hours apart, speak the same language, but all these little nuances, even something like you mentioned, an idiom, that term beat around the bush. That's something I always caution people when they're dealing with people from different cultures. be careful with idioms because sometimes in another culture, it doesn't make sense to them because they don't have the context for it. You obviously have dealt with people from all over the world, so you've become familiar with a lot of these different idioms. I'm curious, context is a concept that I talk about a lot. And in the work that you do and I do, one of the things that is very specific to how we communicate is that we're very frequently having to communicate complicated or complex financial ideas, frequently to people who are non-finance people, right? So when we're working with someone outside, and this is a very, something that's very typical to FP&A, is that we're working oftentimes with a lot of different departments, right? So if I'm working with a sales and marketing person and I've got some complex financial thing that I need to explain to them, I can't finance explain it. I need to explain it in terms that they understand. So are there any strategies that you found particularly helpful in communicating finance topics or ideas to non-finance people?
Yes. Couple of them which come to my mind is one, speaking their language. So if they are not used to accounting terms, I'm sure revenue is a very common term, but there are other terms which they may not be familiar with. So converting that into what it means for them. So let's take an example of revenue. So what does it mean for somebody who's working in marketing? It might be number of leads. It might be number of
So
people
this is a great example. I'm glad you chose this example.
who register on the website. So talking it in their language, which is what their targets are or their KPIs are, is the first thing that comes to my mind. So if you are putting a lot of charts with expenses, revenues, they may not relate to it. But if you put charts and talk about the metrics that they are used to looking at every day, day in, day out, I think that is one. And second thing, which is again very obvious, but it is important, is what we can do out of all of the things that we are presenting. So is there some action that they can take? Or if not, if there is no action, what is the message that is conveyed, and what does that message would mean to them? So taking an example again, so say if you're projecting revenues on a slide, and if you're projecting it by different departments, now you know if there are three departments in the organization, and you have the sales lead or the business lead of all those three departments, um, you want to make sure that what message you want to convey to department one, department two, department three. Say if you want to tell department two that they are doing very well, that has to come out on the slide somehow. So what one is what action they can take, and second is if there is no action, what is the message that you want them to go home with?
That's a great simple framework. I'm so glad you used that example because it's the one that I use a lot is, have you ever been in a meeting and there's someone from the sales department and someone mentions a sales number or a revenue number, and sales and accounting are talking about two different numbers, but they're both calling it sales, right? And sometimes it just comes down to, again, understanding the culture. If you're in a sales department and so a salesperson is on the phone and they get on the phone and that person says, yes, I'm going to buy XYZ product, to that salesperson, they may say, I just made a sale. But the accounting department hasn't seen anything in the accounting system, right?
Yep.
So there's a disconnect there. So if you're sitting in a meeting with those two people and they're talking about sales, they may not be talking about the same thing. So the more you get to know the people in the different departments, and to your point, you know, what are the actions or what are the messages, the stories? I think that's a great, really simple framework way to think about it. Let's just shift gears for a minute here and I want to talk a little bit about this virtual environment that we all seem to work in today. Even if you go to an office, full time for your job, you still operate in a virtual environment, whether you're taking courses online for continuing education credits, or there's a million different ways that we're interacting with people virtually. When it comes to virtual meetings or virtual presentations, what are some of the things that you have found to be maybe just a couple of key things that have been really helpful for you to be most effective when you're communicating virtually?
Definitely. So one thing I noticed, I mean, we'll break it down into maybe three things. So the first and the most important thing that I have noticed, especially with people working in finance, that they directly jump to their presentation. So if the meeting is starting at say 8 a.m. Uh, and you have 10 people in the room, they'll directly start sharing screen and start with the presentation. So one thing what I feel is going to be beneficial to everybody who's in the meeting, and it'll also add to the finance team's credibility, is to spend maybe 2 minutes talking about the context of why we are doing this, or what led to this presentation. Maybe there was a meeting that happened last week. So sharing the context is probably some people don't do, which is that which is very important in the virtual setting. So you might feel that okay, all the 10 people were there in the previous meeting, and there's no need for it. But it is always good to go back and tie together what happened in the last meeting and why we are doing this today. So maybe spending 2 minutes to build context is first one. Um, uh, what else? Second one would be to be able to make it slightly engaging. So this is from my experience doing trainings. So when I started training about a year and a half, 2 years back, I used to be just talking and talking, and which didn't didn't resonate very well with the students. So what works better from whatever experience I have is to share something, then stop, see what they have understood, have an activity or engagement with them, maybe as simple as a poll, or maybe as simple as something that you need to type in the chat box. So having some engagement, having a checkpoint where you stop. If it's an hour long presentation or if it's a 90-minute presentation, stop at every maybe 10 minutes and see if there are any questions, see if people have
Mm-hmm.
comment in the chat box, and maybe address those. So I think those are a couple of things that comes to mind while you do virtual presentations. What a,
Yeah, there was,
what else do you? I'm curious. What else would you recommend?
those are some of the same ones that I would recommend off the top. I think being visually engaging, especially when we're working remotely, I always try to create situations where I'm able to use my body language. So, a lot of times people have their physical setup, their camera, their laptop, whatever it is, set up in a way that, it's kind of at a down angle. It's kind of looking up and you're seeing up their nose. And it creates subconsciously, the brain immediately says, this, something's off here, right? If we were in the same room with each other, we would be at eye level, right?
Yes.
I have this thing called a plexicam, which is just a little plastic thing that loops over my monitor and it holds my camera in a spot right. And I have it positioned right now, right above your head, so that when I'm looking at you, I'm looking just below the camera. And so it looks like I'm looking into the camera. So when people are watching this, and hopefully when you're seeing this, it feels a lot more natural, like we're in the same room with each other. Simple things like I notice you have done this. I don't see your microphone, but before we started recording, when we were kind of both getting everything kind of organized and settled, I noticed you do have like a professional microphone. It's just outside of the camera view, right? So it's not in the camera view. It doesn't create something artificial that automatically tells my brain, this is not a normal conversation. There's something different about this. Things like having a headset on. I have one, my backup, and it's happened before. I've had technical issues and I've had to grab my headset. And I've had people jokingly say, it gives you that look like, may I take your order? right? Like you're going to a fast food place and you're in the drive-through, right? That doesn't feel normal, like we're in the same room with each other. So anything and everything that I can do to create the feeling like we're face to face, the most I can do to mimic that, I'm going to do that. We have to make some trade-offs though, right? You notice you could see my microphone. I've experimented with different spots with the particular microphone that I have right now. I feel like this is a good position for the best sound, but it's not blocking my face. So a little bit of a trade-off, right? And then I have a note on my monitor that says, be yourself, not a presenter. And so for those of us that do this more and more, and we educate ourselves and we do Toastmasters and all these courses to teach us how to be better speakers and better presenters, it's very easy to slip into that sort of very stiff kind of presenter mode where we're constantly thinking about doing the right thing. And we become less ourselves and we're less natural. So again, it's a balance, right? There are all these rules of thumb that are extremely helpful, but we also want to keep ourselves enough relaxed that we can engage with that person and make them feel heard, like we're truly listening to them. So one of the things that I want to get to, and hopefully we can spend the rest of our time on this part of it, which is everything that you do with your business is about career development, helping FP&A professionals develop their careers, right? Master FP&A skills. When I look on your LinkedIn profile right now, my mission, help 1 million finance pros master FP&A skills. So you talked about this earlier a little bit about the feedback. What started you down this whole road was you kept getting feedback of people asking questions. Mm-hmm. So in your view, what are some of the key skills that people should be focused on, whether they're trying to transition into FP&A from another discipline, or if they're already in FP&A, but they want to really master those skills, as you put it? What are some of those skills?
Sure. And so this is again from a presentation I did for AFP virtually last year, and very recently with Plan Buddies a couple of weeks back. So if somebody has to ask, somebody asks me. So earlier when I started writing, I used to do a list of top 10 skills that you need to master FP&A roles, and it was a long list. And people reach out to me, okay, I don't have time right now to do all of these 10 things, but can you tell me the top 3 things that you can focus on? That so that's how that framework came into. I mean, that's how that framework came, and it's a part of my book. So the first and the most important thing is understanding the business. So if you don't understand how the business works, how it makes money, how uh, it's structured, what are the business units, how are different functions working together to make and deliver that product or that service. If you don't understand that, then it is very difficult to do your job as a FP&A professional, because you are dealing with different parts of the business. You are collaborating and you are partnering with different functions and different business teams. So if you don't understand the business, that is something that you should spend your time, especially if you're starting out new in your role, maybe spend about 30 days just to understand what the company is doing, what is the business, what are the products, what are the services, who are the different people in the team. And it's a continuous process. After working for 4 different organizations for more than 2 years, I still don't know a lot about it, but every day I learn something new about the company and about the organization. So that is number one. If it's only the one thing that you can do to uh, if you don't have any, if you cannot do anything else, you should focus on this number one foundational skill, which is understanding the business. Now, once you understand the business, uh, usually finance and accounting people are very good with data and they are very good with reporting. The second one would be to take a step further and convert that data into something which is actionable, which a lot of people also talk about. Uh, but what is actionable? What is insights? Is something that the business partner that you're working with or the teams that you're working with, they didn't already know, but because of your analysis, you've come to a conclusion that is something which was not known by the business earlier and which could potentially help them make a different decision, is what I define as an insight. So being able to work with data and come up with certain insights, which can help make better decisions, is the second one. And third is being able to work with different teams, being able to build relationships. As FP&A is more and more becoming a uh, people oriented role versus something which used to be earlier, which is more of reporting tools, accounting. So being able to work with different types of people is another thing which probably brings which is the third part of it. So understanding the business, being able to find insights and communicate insights, and then being able to work with different parts of the business and building those relationships, so that once you communicate some insights, it's action upon. So if you don't build those relationships, chances are that whatever analysis you've done, work you've done, may not be heard, may not be taken
Yeah.
into consideration. But if you have those relationships, they will be looking forward to you for those insights, and more of those will get implemented, and it'll uh, make the business better. It'll make the overall business better.
Yeah. And that second one, I think, is, to me, in my experience, that developing insights that are actionable is the one that I think for me was the biggest difference from like accounting type roles where they're more focused on reporting history, right? We just want to make sure everything is accurate and we report things in a structured way and in compliance and all of that. That's sort of our role. And many times they're not really thinking about creating insights. It's just not part of their job in many cases, right? And in FP&A and even some of the other jobs I had, like mergers and acquisitions, for example, I remember a mantra oftentimes when you would present a piece of data, so what, right?
Yes.
So what? So what am I supposed to do with this, right? So you just gave me this report or this dashboard or this presentation or whatever this thing is you presented me with. What am I supposed to do with this that can improve the business? And so I think because of hearing that so many times from my bosses, I started internalizing that. And as I would be preparing analysis, I would just be picturing when I deliver this, the first thing they're going to ask is, so what? What am I supposed to do about this? How can we use this to improve the business? And so that was almost like a lens, almost like a pair of glasses I would put on to view the analysis that I was preparing. And then I think also that last point that you hit on, how you present that. So you may do this incredible analysis and uncover all of these insights, but we still need to be able to communicate them in a way that engages that other person and gets them to have a little bit of an aha moment to go, oh, I get it. I understand why you're telling me this piece of data or this trend or whatever this analysis that you did. And now I understand what I'm supposed to do about it. And the way you communicated that makes it very easy for them to connect the dots and then be motivated to take that action.
Yes. And
Yeah.
one thing I would add is, there will be many times that you something that you found insightful, which is actually insightful, which they did not know, but they may not want to take action, which is absolutely fine. But you did your job as a FP&A professional, or as a finance person, to bring that out. If they didn't knew about it and they now know it, but they don't want to take action, which is fine, which has happened more times than probably when they've taken action.
Yeah.
But you hit, I mean, if you take, say, 100 shots, you hit 10. So if you can do 1 out of 10, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah. I think the people skills part of it too is important, especially in the case that you just talked about, right? I can remember like it was yesterday. when I worked at Royal Caribbean, one of the departments whose budget I worked on was sales and marketing. And at that time, we had a new ship that was being built, and it was gonna be ready and on the water cruising in the new year. And so I had a meeting with the senior VP of sales, and we had a top-down budget process. And the CFO decided we're cutting the sales and marketing budget by 5%. So now here I am, a financial analyst in my 20s, and I have to go meet with the senior VP of sales and marketing and tell him we have to cut your budget by 5%. And this is not negotiable. This is coming from the CFO. I'm just the messenger. But now I have to do my best to now work with them and get buy-in on that and try to influence this person who's way above me on the org chart in a position where there's a great disparity, but I still need to be able to work with that person. And that's one of the many roles in FP&A where we know we're not going to be able to implement what we might think might be the best thing for that particular item that we're talking about. We don't have a choice in it, and we just have to do the best that we can to use our communication skills to get everybody bought in and moving towards that goal.
Yes, one thing what I would like to add is, say you've communicated certain insight and you think there's certain action that can be taken to improve the business, or certain decision that can be taken to improve the business. So you also need to follow up with, so it can get lost between different departments. So I've had experiences where they agreed upon certain things which was presented, which is going to be implemented, but it got lost between three departments. Department A was thinking Department B will take action. Department B was thinking Department A will. I mean, it got lost between the. So also following up is another important thing, and it might happen after. So there have been many cases where after following up, I realized, or I got the answer that, okay, this thing what you suggested is great, but it's not practically possible. These are the things that stop us from implementing it, and the cost of implementing it is probably more than, which is absolutely fine. But what you need to do is also, once you make that recommendation and everybody agrees, also follow up so that it doesn't get lost within the organization.
Yeah. So in the last couple of minutes we have here, let's talk specifically about your programs. So FP&A professionals, and when I look on you, first of all, if you're not following Asif on LinkedIn, follow him on LinkedIn. He shares so much free content. It's every day that I look on your posts, there's, and I'm not talking about just a, 2 sentences, like substantial posts of very, very useful information, sometimes checklists, sometimes just different structures of how to think about things. But talk to us a little bit about the different training programs that you have.
So the way we started was with a foundations program, which I mentioned my partner already was running on Udemy, which was a 2-hour program. What we wanted to do was to bring that in person. So what we started in 2022, and we have done about 8 cohorts right now, and the cohort is about 25 students. So about 200 plus students have taken that. So it's 8 live sessions, and each session is about one of the skills that they need to build in FP&A. So there's a session on budgeting, along with practical examples on how they can see what a budget looks like for different industries. There's a session on forecasting. So once the budget is done, how do you make sure that you continuously track progress, and how do you update the forecast? How do you get it reviewed? How do you load it into the system? So there's entire module on forecasting. Then there are modules on management reporting. So different types of reports people do in FP&A, from month-end reports to quarter-end reports to risk and opportunities assessments, flash reports. So there are 10 different types of reports people do. So there are examples of each of those types of reports for different industries that people can see. And the last 2 modules are also, one is on presentations and data storytelling, which you are an expert in. So how do you present insights? How do you present it to senior management? Is what we teach in that. And the final one is on finance business partnering. How do you deal with different people in the company? How do you deal with somebody in sales who is, like you mentioned, 20 years senior to you, but you need to communicate something to that person. So the
Mhm.
final module is on finance business partnering. So there are 5 modules overall, and it's a 8 session program, which is about 16 to 18 hours.
Okay, 16 to 18 hours. Quick question on the forecasting piece. Do you touch on rolling forecasting at all?
Yes, yes, we do.
Okay,
We
awesome.
show them what's a traditional, what's a rolling, what's the difference. So we did this for about, I think, 5 cohorts, and then we realized more people should be able to access this. And because it was in person, and it was costing about $300 for people to invest in that program to attend it. A lot of people could not afford it, especially in countries like India, Africa. Lot of people reached out to us. Okay, can you make this more affordable? And that's when we decided to make a self-paced version of the training, which is at 1/5 of the cost, and that version is also doing well. So about 200 people have taken the live version, and about 300 people have taken the self-paced version, which is the same curriculum.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. So same curriculum. So just what you prefer, what fits you, either your budget, your time frame. Obviously, the self-paced is much more flexible. It's less of an investment, but then you don't get that live ability to interact, engage, and ask questions. So but I love the fact that, and you're making me think about, different ways of structuring some of my own courses, because I've gone back and forth, right? I love live because you don't get this with the recordings, but I also love recordings because it makes it much more accessible, much more convenient. It makes it available to a wider audience. So I'm always looking at, what's the balance? How do you do that? I know Christian Wadig in his FP&A bootcamp, one of the things he's done is he's combined the cohort-based live classes, then he has a recorded component all within one product. So there's lots of different ways of doing this. And I think it's great that there are options for people. So we're at the top of the hour here. I want to go ahead and wrap up, but before we do, where is the best place for people to find you? How do they reach out and get in touch with you if they have any questions, or if they want to sign up for one of your programs, where do they go for that?
I think the best way would be to reach out to me via LinkedIn. So if you're connected to me, you can send me a message, and I think that would be the best way to reach out to me.
Okay, awesome. And the courses?
The courses that they are available on the website, so probably we can mention them somewhere in the note.
Yeah, we'll put the links in the show notes
Where they can access them. But if they go on my LinkedIn, they would probably see it on my homepage as well.
Yeah. So that's what I would recommend, is to give you a follow on LinkedIn, and not just so you can go grab one of the courses, but the stuff that you put out every day. Again, I mean, it's super valuable stuff. Even if you don't take the course, my hunch is when you start looking at the stuff that's free, you're going to go, well, geez, if this was given away for free, how valuable is the stuff that's in the courses that you pay for? Like, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer if you're an FP&A, in my opinion. And you'll see that when you start seeing what he's putting out on LinkedIn. With that, again, we're at the top of the hour. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see you guys next time.